Super Bowl out of me. Believe that. Believe that.
Yo, what is going on, guys? Welcome back to week 8 of the Everything Ravens podcast. My name is Logan. I'm the host of this podcast. I run the Instagram account at everything_Ravens. Follow me on Instagram. It's the biggest Ravens fan page community. Also follow at Everything Ravens podcast on Instagram, which is the account for this podcast to get all the information you'll need on this podcast. Now let's meet today's co-host, but we're going to actually have a special guest today. We are joined by Jay at Eagles_Empire today. He'll be talking to us about our matchup preview with the Eagles as well as other interesting NFL stuff going on right now. So introduce yourself, Jay.
What's up? I'm Jay, aka Eagles Empire. I'll be here to talk about, the Eagles and Ravens early season matchup as well as some other things going on in the NFL right now.
And of course, we'll be joined by Brooks and Kyrie, like always.
What's up, guys? Brooks, glad to be back. Excited to talk to Jay and get a different perspective on this crazy offseason we've had in the NFL.
Hey guys, it's Kyrie. Great to talk some Ravens Eagles, especially with someone new. So let's get to it.
Alrighty, so let's not keep you waiting. You guys know why Jay's here. We play the Philadelphia Eagles this year, Week 6 at Lincoln Financial Field, 1 o'clock kickoff, October 18th. So what are your guys' thoughts on that matchup?
Well, I already highlighted this game when we went over our schedule. It's kind of a trap game for us. We have Pittsburgh the next week. I thought going into Philly, it's always a tough place to play. That would be a tough challenge on our schedule. But I'm interested to hear Jay because when we decided to do this podcast, I looked at the Eagles schedule and they're coming off 2 tough games prior at San Francisco and at Pittsburgh. We're the third game in a tough stretch. I want to see how he sees us rank on those matchups and how they'll do coming off those tough games.
Yeah, so playing Baltimore early on in the season, for an Eagles fan, it's tough to see the best team in football last year with the reigning MVP. But historically, under Doug Peterson now, the Eagles have done really well at home. But there are some matchup problems I think they're going to have with Baltimore. One of them is Lamar Jackson. They have struggled against mobile quarterbacks for some time, and Russell Wilson has shown that they've never been able to beat Russell Wilson, and they struggled with quarterbacks who can kind of get out of the pocket. What they're going to hope is that their new and improved defensive line with Javon Hargrave can come in and really kind of knock the pocket down. And I know Baltimore lost Marshall Yanda, so I think that interior offensive line, that matchup's going to be really important. Of course, the Eagles have done a really good job at stuffing the run over the last few years under Jim Schwartz. So I think they're going to want to really collapse that pocket in front of him, push him back, and just hope to contain him. I think they have a pretty athletic group of linebackers with Nate Gary and Duke Riley. So they might try and have one of those guys, or even a safety like Jalen Mills, shadow him and kind of spy him. But it's tough because, we saw him, what he did last year was pretty remarkable for a second-year quarterback, and he's an elite athlete. So I think that's going to be an important matchup. And then how they're going to attack Baltimore's secondary. Of course, they have 2 of the best corners in the league in Marlon Humphrey and Marcus Peters, and you still have Earl Thomas, and hopefully Tavon Young can come back. He's a Temple kid. I know he was out all of last year because of a neck injury. So that's a tough defense to play, but it's going to be another important matchup is the Eagles' offensive line because they have 2 big question marks at left tackle and right guard. Jason Peters is still a free agent at this time. So Andre Dillard, the second-year player now, will likely line up against a guy like Matthew Judon. And Matt Pryor, who is filling in for Brandon Brooks, who just tore his Achilles not too long ago. He's projected to be the starting right guard. He'll be going up against guys like Derek Wolfe and Brandon Williams. So it's going to be an interesting matchup. I think it's a 1 o'clock game, but it feels like one of those 1 o'clock games that's going to be one of the better games of the day.
Yeah, I'm really excited about the Ravens and Eagles. One, just because of my selfish nature, because I'm literally like 15 minutes away from Philadelphia. My mom, my dad, my stepdad, my sister, everyone's Eagles fans. So it's always going to be great talking trash, but it's very exciting because, one, the Eagles, I believe, can be a really good team this year in the NFC. I believe that division is up for grabs. The Cowboys, there's uncertainty. Dak Prescott, he's just on a franchise tag, but there's some muddy waters with him and Jerry Jones. We don't know how the Cowboys are going to go, new coaching staff. Giants, I don't think, got that much better this offseason. The Redskins have been dysfunctional at best. I know they got Ron Rivera. So I feel like the Eagles are going to be very competitive in that division, and I'll be competitive in the NFC. But the big question for me is Carson Wentz. Is he going to be healthy? I love Carson Wentz. I've been a big Carson Wentz fan. If he is healthy, this would be a game. This could possibly be the best game of that weekend. But if he's not healthy, I feel like the Ravens will walk away pretty easily with a win. Lamar Jackson, he's going to try to repeat his success he had last year, and I believe it's going to be an offensive shutout, like back and forth between these two. I don't think it's going to be a really like low scoring type of game. Just Eagles. If Carson Wentz is healthy and he gets his weapons back, Deshaun Jackson comes back, I believe it's going to be something really cool to watch. But to me, is Carson Wentz is going to be healthy? If he's healthy, this is a very dangerous situation for the Ravens in that schedule. And I will believe it can be a trap game if Carson Wentz is healthy. If he's not, I don't really think the Eagles much of a threat.
Yeah, and to that point, it talks about what Jay said about with the Eagles' offensive line. There's a lot of question marks up front. Obviously, the Brandon Brooks injury throws another wrench into that. And the Ravens blitz more than any team in the league. Keeping Carson Wentz clean in that pocket is going to be a struggle for them all year. It's going to be really important in this game. I think Miles Sanders is poised for a breakout year. I think he could have a big game against us potentially. I think we've struggled with those type of backs in the past. He has a lot of shiftiness to his game, but he sees the hole really well. Trying to make them one-dimensional and making Carson Wentz uncomfortable early was really key in the Ravens' game plan.
Yeah, I think another thing, too, is the familiarity. I know John Harbaugh, he spent a couple of years in Philadelphia, so, obviously some familiarity there. These two guys have, teams have joint practices before. So a little familiarity there. Doug Pearson, coming similar off the Andy Reid tree. Like I said, it's going to be a really exciting matchup. And like you said, the offensive line, that's going to be a very key component for the Eagles to try to stay in that game because, Wink, he loves his blitzes. So he's going to definitely try to go after Carson Wentz. Another thing, too, is that I'm actually kind of curious about is how they're going to use Jalen Hurts because, very similar, I think, is going to be how it was with the Ravens with Joe Flacco and Lamar Jackson. Set up some packages there to get them on the field. The Ravens been there before, so I believe they might have some answers for that. But it'll be very interesting to see how that works out, that dynamic, if Jalen Hurts does get on the field and make some plays.
Yeah, it's actually pretty interesting because the offensive coordinator for Baltimore that first year with Lamar was Marty Morningway, and Marty's been around Philadelphia for a long time, and he actually just came back. He's an offensive consultant, so they brought him back. Interestingly, after the Combine, now what we did not know was that the Eagles had talked to Jalen Hurts a decent amount of times in Indianapolis that week, so I think maybe they might have had that idea that they want to kind of use this dual quarterback, this really good athletic kid at quarterback, and you look, well, who's someone that you know really well, and who's someone who's done this before, and that's Marty Morningway. I know Ravens fans aren't the biggest fans of Marty. I think in his extended age, he's not been the best play caller, but he's been around the league for a long time. He's been around the Andy Reid style a long time. So I think in his new role, I think just being a senior voice to Doug Peterson, I think they could do some interesting things with Jalen Hurts. Will it be that early on? I don't know. But it's exciting to see, and you're also curious because as an Eagles fan, I was extremely confused on day 2 when they took him. But I kind of understand where they're going with. But could they do that against Baltimore? We'll see. And with Baltimore being one of those teams that love to throw the kitchen sink at the quarterback, I think it's going to be really important for their running back, Miles Sanders, to be a good pass protector. That's one thing he struggled with in college, and he really improved as a second-year player. And then it's going to be on, the veterans like Jason Kelsey and Lane Johnson to really kind of help the younger guys pick up the blitz and kind of figure out those confusing blitz packages Baltimore throw at them. So I think it's going to be an interesting game, and I think the Eagles want to be a little more creative on their defensive side, so I think they might try and throw some things at Lamar Jackson that he hasn't seen before. So I think it's going to be one of those games that could be really low scoring, or you might see 45 points on the board.
Yeah, I just wanted to say, I will speak for all Ravens fans. I hated Marty. I don't know if I hated him more than Mark Trestman, but it's very, very close. Very close. So I'm glad you guys have him. But I did want to talk to you about the Jalen Hurts thing because besides Jordan Love getting drafted to the Packers, that was, to me, the Jalen Hurts getting drafted by the Eagles was the second ridiculous, crazy thing I never thought was going to happen. I'm like, okay, they're going to place Carson Wentz. They're not going to place Carson Wentz. He's Carson Wentz. I know there's some Eagles fans out there that makes the argument that Nick Foles is better, which I just completely disagree with. But I'm like, Carson Wentz is the future of the franchise. So what was your thoughts during that draft night? You spent a second round draft pick. And, second rounds sometimes have a value of a first round pick if you get the right guy on Jalen Hurts when you could have got, I don't know, a receiver, a cornerback, a defensive lineman. You could have filled a bigger needs than a quarterback, especially round 2.
Yeah, I was pretty stunned. I couldn't believe it when I saw the tweet, and I thought it was a fake. I thought, hey, this team just maybe our guys got wrong information and they're going to say some other name. But when they said Jalen Hurts, it was a lot of confusion because you have a $100 million quarterback in Carson Wentz, but then you spend a second-round pick on Jalen Hurts. And I like Jalen Hurts, but he definitely has some improvement he needs to make. Right now, he's really a one-read quarterback. If you take away that one read, he's not yet fully developed to go through his progressions and make another throw. So you say, well, why'd you take him? And the Eagles are that team that just is going to always overvalue the quarterback position. Since Doug Peterson and Howie Roseman have been the two head honchos now, they've spent a lot of money at quarterback. That first year, they spent $36 million on Sam Bradford, $21 million on Chase Daniel, and they traded multiple first-round picks to get Carson Wentz. And, of course, they brought back Nick Foles. They gave him a big kind of one-year incentive after the Super Bowl. And then you go out and draft Jalen Hurts. It's confusing because sometimes, you wonder why teams do what they do. Because sometimes you think, well, I'm smarter than this team. And I think that was one of those moments because people said, why don't you just take Denzel Mims or Christian Fulton? But I think they have a plan. I think what they see here is a kid. I think everyone loves the kid. You're not going to find a person who's going to say something bad about Jalen Hurts. If you want to develop him as a quarterback, use him in a utility role, and maybe you can trade him 3.5 years down the line and get maybe a first-round pick if he develops. Because we've seen them do it before. They did it with Kevin Kolb. They did it with Sam Bradford. So we'll see what happens. But I think it's interesting that the one player that they were also considering, well, if Jalen Hurts wasn't on the board, they had two players in mind. The safety Jeremy Chin, who went to Carolina, and J.K. Dobbins, the kid who the Baltimore Ravens drafted, the running back at Ohio State. So it's kind of interesting that Dobbins was one of the guys they wanted, even though they have Miles Sanders. So I think, hey, maybe this was a move saying, hey, we're going to run the ball a little bit more. We're going to creative running the ball. But apparently that morning, Howie Roseman and Doug Peterson sat down, and the conversation was, if Jalen Hurts is there at our pick, he's our guy. And I think people have compared it to when they wanted to take Russell Wilson. So in 2012, they took Nick Foles, I believe in the 3rd round, if I remember, and they went into that draft. They loved Russell Wilson, and they wanted Russell Wilson, but they couldn't get him. Seattle kind of swooped right under them, and they were stunned. Joe Banner, who was still part of the team at that point, even kind of said it that we were shocked that Seattle took Russell Wilson there. So some people have said, oh, couldn't you have traded down to get Jalen Hurts? Couldn't you have waited? And for them, I think they value the quarterback position too much. They liked the kid too much. They knew the backlash was going to come, but they said, hey, we're taking our guy. We do not care. This is a kid we love. And if you're in a situation in 3 years where, hey, Carson Wentz got another major injury and you just can't continue betting on him, you have someone you develop for 3 years under the wing.
Yeah, I mean, with Jalen Hurts, I can speak on behalf of all Sooner fans here, is that Jalen Hurts is really, really frustrating to watch at times. There's times where he just looks amazing. There's other times where he just looks terrible. Take that LSU game, for instance. Jalen Hurts was horrible in that game. But I think if you can get him more consistent, you can get him coached up. I think with his skill set, it'd be really interesting to see how it plays out in the NFL. Kind of like Lamar Jackson. A lot of people question how he would work out in the NFL. So maybe there is something there with Jalen Hurts.
Well, I think actually going off that, I think if you have plays built in for him, you're not asking him to do a lot of things. You're not asking him to process a lot of things. If you're running trick plays where he's the thrower, you're basically giving him 2 reads, pass or run. It's kind of like a more complicated RPO where you're saying if the pass is here, throw it. If it's not there, use your speed, use your abilities, and run it. And I think when will they let him do that? I don't know. Having no OTAs, no minicamp, no nothing like that, and who knows what's going to happen with training camp. I know the plan is to start on time, but are we going to play 4 preseason games? Are we going to Teams are coming in late. You're not even going to see him throw the football in your facility until July 28th. So who really knows? But I think it's one of those picks that people hate now, but in 4 years you might say, hey, that actually worked out pretty well.
Yeah, and at least right now, you talked about how he can bring some creativity to that offense, to that running game. Doug Peterson has yet to have a 1,000-yard rusher on his roster, and part of that is he does running backs by committee a lot of the time. Last year, Scott, Sanders, Howard all took carries. Howard's gone. Maybe Hurts takes a little bit of a role. And we had half of a season with this with Flacco and Lamar for that first half of Lamar's rookie season. And I was a fan of it. I thought it was effective. I thought it brought a new look to the defense, something that they had to study on film at the very least. Even if we only brought it out once or twice a game, it was something that threw them off. And it was an interesting piece in the offensive playbook that we always had in our back pocket. So for the Eagles, already creative offensively, to have that, I'm sure they'll utilize it. You're right, though, without rookie minicamps and OTAs, it'll be interesting to see how slowly they have to bring it along. But Hurts, we've seen him transfer, go to different programs, be effective immediately. I'm sure he's a fast learner and at the very least a good teammate. So that's the nod I have to give him.
All right, now let's talk about one of our draft picks, which is Patrick Queen. I think with Patrick Queen, this early stretch of the season, playing Austin Hooper, playing Travis Kelce, playing Zach Ertz now in this Eagles game, he's really going to get his money's worth as a rookie, and we're going to really see how he adapts to the league and how well he can cover guys right away. Because before the draft, a lot of people were saying that Patrick Queen was the best coverage linebacker in the draft, besides Isaiah Simmons, obviously. So now he's really going to get his money's worth.
Yeah, that's a great point. The Eagles run a lot of two tight end sets. They have two good ones, Zach Ertz and Dallas Goedert. And then Miles Sanders broke out a lot of long screen passes and seam routes for touchdowns last season. Certainly, Queen's going to be asked to put in coverage a lot this game. This is a real test for him.
Yeah, I think they might actually kind of try and attack him and make him think a lot more than he would want to, make him process a lot of information really quickly because – they're going to run two tight ends. They might run both tight ends at him. They might put a tight end out wide because they like to do that with Zach Ertz a lot, or put Zach Ertz in the slot and have him cover him one-on-one. So I think they might go at him a lot if Baltimore puts him in a big position. And, of course, Miles Sanders really developed as a pass catcher. So, in space, Sanders can really beat a lot of linebackers. So Queen is going to have, show why he was a first-round pick, but he's such a good athlete that he can mask some of those inefficiencies in coverage or mask being a little bit slow to process the ball. So I think he'll probably be a very good player, but I think early on having to be the Mike linebacker for Baltimore is a big responsibility, but it shows you that they believe in him. And I know they loved Kenneth Murray, and the guy we all talked about for Baltimore was Kenneth Murray, but Patrick Queen was their second best linebacker on the board. They also got Malik Harrison too, so I think they're pretty okay there. But you're going to put him in a tough situation. But I think from what happened last year with Baltimore's linebackers, I think Patrick Queen is an upgrade, really, no matter what.
Yeah, I agree with you. I mean, I think that Eagles are definitely going to challenge him early on, just because he's a rookie, he's a first-round pick. They're going to want to see what they can do with him against them. But I think it's going to be a great matchup for him, especially weeks before that game. He'll face the Texans, he'll face the Chiefs, so he's going to already be put to that test, like you guys said. So that's definitely going to be a very exciting matchup. I think he'll be ready for it. And even the Kenneth Murray, I was a big Kenneth Murray fan, but after we drafted Queen, I honestly could say I think we was better off drafting Queen overall. I feel like Queen has more upside than Murray, so I really do love that. I really did love the pick. And I do think it's going to be a good matchup. But week 6 in the NFL, he's going to have his feet wet. I think he'll be up for the challenge. And I think he's going to have a possible big game against the Eagles if they do try to challenge him.
Yeah, and transitioning from our LSU first-round pick to the LSU wide receiver that was still on the board when the Eagles picked, I would love, Jay, your input on the Jalen Reagor, Justin Jefferson debate and why the Eagles chose that, and what are your thoughts on that pick?
I love the Jalen Reagor versus Justin Jefferson argument because for me, it was kind of simple. I was a fan of Justin Jefferson. I liked him as a prospect. I did not like him for the Eagles as much as some draft pundits pegged him as a great fit, and Matt Millers and the Daniel Jeremiahs, they said Justin Jefferson, Eagles, boom, great fit. But for me, I look at it, and I kept telling Logan, he kept saying, who are they going to take? And I would say Jalen Reagor, Jalen Reagor, Jalen Reagor. And he didn't believe me, but on draft day, of course, they took him 21st overall. So why did they go with Jalen Reagor, who his college production dropped, a lot due to quarterback play, but why did it drop when you have Justin Jefferson, who was one of the top 5 most productive wide receivers in college football last year? I just think it's the skill set they both offer is very different, and I think what they were looking for was someone who can be just more than just a receiver, because Jalen Reagor is going to start on the outside most likely. Of course, he's a much faster player than his 40 times head. He plays much bigger than his 5'10 or 5'11 frame says. But I think what they want to do a lot with Jalen Reagor is just get the football in his hands in a lot of creative ways. They brought in Rick Scangarello, who was with the 49ers with Kyle Shanahan for a little bit before he was in Denver. But I kind of liken Jalen Reagor's rookie role to Deebo Samuel. Samuel came in and he was a receiver, a rusher. They used him on screens, end arounds. They kind of schemed in touches for him. And that was an aspect they were missing last year. They were just missing one of those guys who you just get the football in his hands and let him work. I think Jalen Reagor can do that. And I think Justin Jefferson is going to produce at the NFL level with the Minnesota Vikings, but I just don't think his fit was great for the Eagles, because right now, as long as you have Zach Ertz and Dallas Goedert on the same roster, you're a 12 personnel team. So then you're asking Justin Jefferson to be your X receiver, because Deshaun Jackson's a Z. He's not going to really face a lot of press coverage. So teams are going to press Justin Jefferson, and with him playing in the slot most of the time, he didn't face a lot of press coverage. So was he going to come in and transition to an X receiver right away? Because if you're putting him on the field, you're probably taking one of Zach Ertz or Dallas Goedert off, and they just don't want to do that. So I think the fit was not there for them. I think Aaron Moorhead, the new wide receiver coach, I think he kind of vouched for Jalen Reagor a lot. And I think he fits Philadelphia so well. I think he leads the Eagles this year. Well, leads the Eagles wide receivers in catches, snaps, and targets. I think he has a huge role. And I know, fantasy football guys are talking about Jalen Reagor because, hey, the wide receiver position was not good last year. It was really bad. It was just mediocre. So he can come in and have a really productive rookie year. But I know Lance Zierlein actually mentioned it. For most of the process, Justin Jefferson was kind of that guy for the Eagles. They were one of the guys they were looking at. But as they did more homework, as the coaches got involved, Jalen Reagor was that guy. And I know of course, we all know they didn't trade up for CeeDee Lamb, but I think they're just as happy to take Jalen Reagor at 21. And if they didn't take Reagor, I thought they were going to take Brandon Ayuk, the kid who ended up going to San Francisco. So I don't know if Justin Jefferson was that high on their board either way.
Yeah, to me, it seems like Justin Jefferson to Philadelphia was more of a media hype thing. Like the media just kept feeding it to you and people just kept drinking the Kool-Aid for that. And that's kind of something that I did. That's why I kept telling you that I thought Justin Jefferson, if he was there for the Eagles, was a done deal. So I was kind of bamboozled when the Eagles did take Reagor. But I think when you look at the Eagles draft, the receivers they took, there's one thing they were wanting to add, and that's just speed. That was the common denominator there. They drafted Jalen Reagor. They drafted Quez Watkins. They drafted John Hightower. They traded for Marquise Goodwin. So all guys who are just known for their speed.
And since we're talking about the Eagles receiving targets, wide receivers, tight ends, I have one burning question for Jay here. Mind you, you are on a podcast of diehard Raven fans. So I'm going to ask you this. Who do you think is going to have the better season this year? Mark Andrews, to me, he's going to be the best tight end this year, or Zach Ertz?
Well, I love my guy, Zach Ertz. I think he's one of the best tight ends to ever lace up the boots in terms of what he can do. He's a carbon copy of Jason Witten. How they play is so similar. I think some Eagles fans take it for granted. During this whole Jamal Adams situation we'll talk about a little bit, I think they've kind of taken what he can do for granted because he's not a super athlete. He's not George Kittle-esque. He's not even as fast as, someone like Travis Kelce. But he gets open and he knows how to beat coverage. He knows how to beat every cover, every zone. He knows how to get open, and he catches every football. With that being said, I was a huge fan of Mark Andrews coming out. that year we drafted Dallas Goedert in the second round. But we kind of knew this team was going to take a tight end because they had no real needs, and they lost Trey Burton in free agency. So you kind of figured they were going to take a tight end, and Mark Andrews was one of the guys I really liked, and I think he's developed into a star tight end. Baltimore took 2 tight ends that year, and Hayden Hurst is no longer on the team, so they let go of a former first-round pick, so they clearly believe that Mark Andrews is almost an elite talent. But production-wise, being that Lamar uses Andrews so much, I think Ertz and Andrews are going to produce very similar. I'm going to say Zach Ertz right now is the better player, but if Mark Andrews is better than Zach Ertz in 2 years, I would not be surprised.
I think a lot of that question falls on the wide receiver cores for these two teams. I think there's a lot of questions going into both their seasons. Hollywood Brown for the Ravens, obviously a whole revitalized wide receiver group in Philadelphia, which we just talked about. There's a lot of questions across the board. These 2 tight ends will still be their quarterback security blankets. They clearly have great connection with their quarterbacks. I think part of the reason we saw a dip in Zach Ertz's numbers a little bit is that unstable quarterback play we've seen from the Eagles. If Carson Wentz can get back to healthy and get back to that MVP form that we have seen him at in the past, I think you'll see Eagles fans and people around the league start to take notice again and realize just how special of a player he is. It's easy to realize it with Andrews because he was part of the most dynamic offense from only a season ago. But if you go back to when the Eagles held that title and that crown, Zach Ertz was making plays all over the field.
Yeah, I agree. Especially with the Eagles, as far as what happens once Carson Wentz comes back, he's 100% healthy, he's ready to go. Because Zach Ertz was his go-to guy. And Zach Ertz, when he's that go-to guy, he's one of to me, a top 5 tight end in the league. I have a lot of respect for Zach Ertz. But I do believe Mark Andrews will have a better season statistically, simply because the Ravens receiving corps, which I love what we did in this offseason. I love Devin Duvernay. I love everything we've done to add to that receiving corps. Hollywood Brown, I was a big fan of that pick, but a year ago. But I don't know if we're going to have a lot of flashy number receivers because we're a run-first dominant team. We know the Ravens always love their tight ends. Even back with Joe Flacco, tight ends have always been a very pivotal point in offense, and that does give Mark Andrews a little bit of a leverage there because he will be at pivotal point. Lamar Jackson, when times get tough, he's going to throw to Andrews. And I also, Hollywood Brown, I believe, is going to be the only receiver that's really going to have a possible 1,000-yard season type of season. And Andrews, I believe, will also have a type of similar numbers. But if Carson Wentz is healthy and he plays majority of the season, Zach Ertz is definitely going to come back on a lot of people's mouths as far as one of the best tight ends in the league.
Yeah, I think Mark is primed for a big year, especially since we did trade Hayden Hurst, because last year, with Hayden Hurst being a first-round pick, the Ravens were still trying to find ways to get him on the field and use him in the passing game. That's no longer the case. I feel like the Ravens are going to use Andrews even more in the passing game now, because who's the tight ends behind Mark Andrews? We have Nick Boyle, who's a blocking tight end, the best blocking tight end in the league, but he's not really much of a receiver, never has been. And then you have like Jake Breeland and Eli Wolf, which I don't see 2 undrafted rookies really taking much receiving snaps away from Mark Andrews. So I think Mark Andrews is looking at a potential like 80-catch, 900-yard season.
Mark Andrews was my fantasy tight end, so anything I respect him. Big ups on the fantasy team last year.
All righty, now let's get into sort of a common denominator on this pod, and that's one of the biggest headlines going around with the NFL right now, and that's star Jets safety Jamal Adams reportedly requesting a trade. Like we discussed on last week's pod, it's been brewing for a while. It kind of hit a breaking point last week. He wants out, and Baltimore and Philadelphia are both teams that two of the 7 teams actually that he requested a trade to.
Yeah, so Jamal Adams, this has been something that's been kind of, you said, brewing since last year at the trade deadline, where Joe Douglas was taking calls for Adams, and Jerry Jones and the Dallas Cowboys, they were right in it. And I assume they're going to be right in it again now that he's officially said, I want out. For Adams, what can you do if you're the Jets right now? Because you do have 2 years left on his deal. You are, you don't have to trade him. But what are you going to do if he says, he has to kind of show up now under the new CBA rules. Holding out has become much harder. So I don't see him getting traded before week 1. I definitely do not see him in an Eagles uniform. I know that they're on his list, Howie Roseman will call Joe Douglas about it. He calls about every single player who's available. He'll make a call. But it just doesn't add up to me. The Eagles have a lot of cap space for 2020, but 2021, they're negative $50 million in the hole. So they're hoping to carry over all of that money next year and still having to make tough roster decisions and probably having to let go or ask guys for a pay cut. So they're in a tough position. So even if you don't have to extend Adams, he still has a $10 million cap hit for 2021. So what, are you at negative $60 million? That's a hard hole to crawl yourself out of. It's just kind of the same discussion Eagles fans had with Jalen Ramsey last year. They were in it to the end with Ramsey. The Jags told Howie Roseman, hey, this is the offer we have in LA. Do you want to match? And they passed. They did not want to trade 2 first-round picks and a second-round pick for Jalen Ramsey, the best cornerback in the league at that point. Their biggest need, they opted not to. They don't see themselves as a team who's Super Bowl or bust, and I don't think this season, how the feel for me this year is not like it was the last 2 years. 2018 and 2019, I felt like, hey, this is a Super Bowl team. They're trying to go for it all. But this kind of feels more toward 2017, where they want to get younger and cheaper. So bringing in Adams, I think, doesn't fit the timeline of this team. I understand he's a 24-year-old All-Pro, but you really can't trade a first and a third and pay $18 million for a safety right now. And for Howie Roseman, he's never traded a first-round pick for a player. The last time the Eagles traded a first-round pick for a player was when they traded the Panthers' first-round pick before in the late 2000s for Jason Peters. But Roseman has never traded a first-round pick, and he's never paid a safety more than $8 million a year, which was Malcolm Jenkins. And he's never used the second-round anything higher than a second-round pick on a safety. So is he going to trade 2 premier draft picks and pay a safety when he hasn't done that? I just don't see it. I think if the Jets just blow it and want like a 4th-round pick, then sure, they'll probably be involved, but I don't see Philadelphia having a horse in this race. I think Adams is a Jet week 1 unless the Dallas Cowboys really want him and they blow them away with an offer, which is Jerry Jones. Nothing surprises you with Jerry Jones anymore.
Yeah, I actually agree. I think Jamal Adams, it's fun to speculate, but I think he will be wearing a Jet uniform come week 1. I think part of that reason is, like you said, the cap situation. It's just so late in the offseason. And even though Adams does have 2 years left on his deal, similarly, when we saw DeAndre Hopkins get traded with time left on his deal, they both want to get paid now. They both feel like they've served their time under this contract, and they've served their teams well, getting all-pro nods. They want the money. That's why I think the Cowboys and the Seahawks, teams that can afford these guys and have shown in the past that they're willing, if the guy's young and ready, to go out and get them and perhaps even overpay for them, that they'll do that. The Ravens and the Eagles in the past have shown restraint and not done that, and I respect that move. But as much as I love Jamal Adams and think he'd be a great fit for either of these teams, I think he'll be in New York when we kick off the season.
Yeah, and with Jamal Adams, I love the guy as a player. I think he's one of the best safeties in the league. But to me, it just doesn't make sense for the Ravens to trade him because you have 2 really, really good, talented safeties already on the roster. And I believe Earl Thomas is, to me, overall a better safety for our system. And I still believe he's a better player, even though Jamal Adams is younger. So I will say, obviously, he's younger, so obviously you got to go for the upside of him being younger. But I believe Earl Thomas is just still a better player. And then 2, I don't believe the Jets are going to trade him. I believe the Jets are going to stay pat. I think Joe Douglas, he's going to stay firm. They got 2 years left in the contract, like you guys mentioned. I do believe at one point, if it continues to be a problem, then, once he gets to 1 year left on his deal, then the Jets will trade him. Because you don't want to just lose this guy for nothing and let him just walk in free agency. So you can't kind of fix this bridge that's kind of burning down right now. You're going to want to just trade him away, get some assets, get some draft picks. And that's where I can see the Eagles or the Ravens come into play because Joe Douglas, before he was the general manager for the Jets, he was the vice president of player personnel for Philadelphia Eagles. We already know Joe Douglas' history in Baltimore Ravens as a scout, so he has some familiarity with these organizations. So if he said, hey, I got a player that I need to get rid of, he got 1 left on his deal, and it's not working out still, he's been wanting to leave, I wouldn't be surprised he calls Howie and said, hey, listen, what's the best offer you can give me? And he might just have to cave for a 2nd or 3rd round pick. Same thing could be for the Ravens because 2 years from now, Thomas is getting older. maybe Eric DeCosta, hey, maybe we'll listen if it's the right price. So I could see something like that happening. But right now, Jamal Adams will stay as a Jet. I don't believe he'll be traded. Cowboys, I'm not really sure about. I know he really wants to go there, but Jerry Jones was pretty close, and he thought he had a deal done with the New York Jets, and they kind of last minute kind of upped the price on him, and I heard kind of ticked them off. And you don't want to do that to Jerry Jones because he bleeds with his heart when it comes to negotiations. So I don't believe Jerry Jones wants to do business with them, but I don't know. Maybe some could work out, but I do believe Jamal Adams will just stay a New York Jet. But you never know. It's the New York Jets. I always make fun of them. They could just say, hey, you can just give us a 4th-round pick for Jamal Adams. We'll call it a day. So I wouldn't be surprised either way.
Yeah, I guess Joe Douglas could call 2 places where he's been and just say, hey, what's the best you can do for me? These are 2 organizations you've worked with for a long time. You can say, hey, we have to move this player today. What's the best you can do for me? And I guess he can go anywhere and do that, but those are 2 guys he's worked with. But even if he says, hey, we got him, we just want a 3rd, I guess I could see the Eagles doing it, but then the contract situation is still an issue for them where I don't think you're going to pay him. Are you going to trade a 3rd? Are you in a situation where you can trade a 3rd-round pick? Hey, he plays a year for you, and then he walks, and yeah, you get that 3rd-round pick back via the compensatory formula. But it's just one of those things where it's like, I don't think Howie Roseman and the Eagles are in the business of making big trades anymore. Yeah, they traded for Darius Slay, but it was a 3rd and a 5th-round pick. It cost them really nothing to do it, to get a corner they wanted for a while. I don't think they see Jamal Adams as that player. Obviously, they probably think he's an elite player. They, showed draft day interest in him. They weren't going to trade up, but hell, if he fell, they would have took him. But I don't think maybe in March, they would have been in a better position to do it. But I think right now, they're going to sit and say, we'll pass on this for right now. The Seahawks are the only real team I can see who says, hey, we'll give you this and that, because that's just what Seattle does, and they do whatever they want. They take whoever they want. They pay whoever they want. Seattle's a weird team like that who sits afloat with Russell Wilson despite making really questionable roster moves. But, hey, I think he's a Jet week 1. He's going to be unhappy to be a Jet week 1. But for New York, things just don't seem right for them right now. They have a head coach people don't like, a third-year quarterback who hasn't taken a step forward, and their best player doesn't want to play for them. So it's a tough day for the New York Jets, and we'll hope to see what happens.
All right, so as Jay was talking about with the Darius Slay move, in my opinion, the Eagles should be really, really fortunate that the Lions are just so incompetent that they just completely screwed up that whole Darius Slay situation. They could have gotten so much more for him if they traded him during the season, but they waited it out, waited for the situation to just hit a complete breaking point to where Darius Slay just wouldn't play for him again, and they just basically had to ship him off for whatever they could get. So I think the Eagles lucked out right there with that.
At the trade deadline, they had a deal all but done, and the Lions were going to get at least their 2nd-round pick. The Eagles, they wanted Darius Slay. They wanted him badly, and they offered what's rumored is they offered Detroit a 2nd-round pick, and they were going to say, hey, we're going to do this. And for whatever reason, last minute, it fell through. He still did not want to be in Detroit. Detroit didn't want to pay him. So they ended up having to trade him for a 3rd and a 5. So you look at it and you think, well, yeah, they got Jeffrey Okudah, but they traded the best corner on the team for a 3rd-round pick. And you signed Desmond Trufant. So did you really get better there? You paid Desmond Trufant a decent amount of money. I think he's getting $10 million a year. Darius Slay signed for $16.7. So I think Darius Slay's almost $7.5 million better than Desmond Trufant. But for Philadelphia, that was a move they felt they had to make. They were in it to the end for Byron Jones. The plan this offseason in free agency was we're gonna get a corner. And it was either Byron Jones or Darius Slay. Luckily, they get Darius Slay for the price they were okay paying, and they didn't have to trade 2 first-round picks like the Los Angeles Rams had to do.
And speaking about Byron Jones, I hate the Cowboys just because their fan base is just ridiculous. I mean, they're almost as bad as the Steelers, almost, but not quite. So I really wanted you guys to get Byron Jones, but I think Howie Roseman, who reminds me a little bit of Ozzie Newsome as far as not really going to spend a lot of money to get the big-time talents. He wants to develop guys, draft guys, and stuff like that. got a pretty much of a steal for Darius Slay because cornerback was definitely a big need for you guys. Secondary was atrocious all season for you guys. And I feel like that was the most weak point besides the receiving group. So you definitely stole one from the Lions. So I think that was a great move for you guys. But I really did want you to get Byron Jones just so Cowboys fans would just have to be miserable for the next 4 or 5 years playing against them.
Yeah, they were really close. Before Miami kind of stunned a lot of people. The Raiders and the Eagles were the two teams all week who were going head-to-head for Byron Jones. That day, they were up until the very end. But when New England franchise tagged Joe Thuney, I think Miami shifted their gears to get Byron Jones. So I think that kind of had a domino effect because Joe Thuney and Brandon Sheriff, those are the two top targets for Miami. Both got franchise tagged. So their next top target assumed to be Byron Jones. And one thing I heard was that Byron, he was interested in Philly, but playing in the NFC East wasn't what he really wanted. He wanted a fresh start somewhere else, and he got that in Miami. So they go out, they get Darius Slay. Now Las Vegas also wanted Darius Slay, so they beat him there. Oakland or Las Vegas is now stuck without a lot of corners. So the Eagles could have been in that same position. So luckily they were able to get Slay. I think having already discussed the trade in October helped them get that deal done. But they were going to pay Darius Slay. They were going to make him the highest paid corner in football, Byron Jones, but it just didn't work out that way. And Dallas fans, they're interesting. But for one thing, my beef with the Cowboys is that how overhyped they are because, frankly, I don't think Dallas got better this offseason. I understand they drafted CeeDee Lamb, but they were already the number one scoring offense in the league last year. So, yes, they got a better receiver, but how much better can you be on offense when your defense definitely got worse? Because they lost Robert Quinn and they replaced him with Aldon Smith, who has not played football in, 4 years? You're replacing Byron Jones with Trayvon Diggs, who, frankly, I don't think is very good. I know his athletic ability has been hyped up, but Quez Watkins, the Eagles' 6th-round pick, took his lunch money a few times when Alabama played that team. And, you lost two major pieces, and some of your good players got worse last year. Demarcus Lawrence, Jalen Smith, Leighton Vander Esch. So I don't know if you got better that much. So for Dallas, a very overhyped team. They're going to be good because they have a good quarterback and, Ezekiel Elliott. But that defense is not very good, and I think people are going to see that quickly.
All right. One final thing before we end this is let's just go over, the Ravens-Eagles game once again. And, one thing that we're excited about where, we each give our perspective, where we think it's a favorable matchup, and then one thing that worries us in that game. So I'll go first with it. In my opinion, with the Ravens and the Eagles, the thing I'm most excited about is the guy we talked about earlier, Mark Andrews, in this game versus the Eagles. I look at the Eagles linebacker core. Linebacker is something that the Eagles have never really valued. I look at their linebacker core. It's like TJ Edwards and I think Nate Gary, or however you say his name. And then they got rid of Malcolm Jenkins. And I think their safeties are like Rodney McLeod and Jalen Mills now. So I think that's a really favorable matchup for us with how much we use tight ends. What I'm worried about is the Eagles' interior defensive line. Their interior defensive line is nasty. They have Fletcher Cox. They have Javon Hargrave. They also have great depth behind them with Hassan Ridgeway and Malik Jackson. And the Ravens lost Marshall Yanda this offseason. So it really worries me, and we're going to see how good that Bradley Bozeman and whoever they start at center and right guard really are. They're going to get tested in this game.
Yeah, for me, this game, this 2019 Eagles team feels a lot like the 2017 Eagles team. So if they can get going and have a really good start to their season, this game, it's not the middle of the season, but it's a little closer to the middle. This game feels to me like when we played the Carolina Panthers on Thursday Night Football in 2017, and we smoked them. The game was close, but they looked like substantially better football team. And that was the game where we all kind of realized, hey, this team has got something. There's something special. So for me, I kind of have that same feel here with Baltimore. I'm going to say, hey, if we go in, even if we don't win, if we play them hard and we play them tight and we look like we are a team that can compete with them, I think that can tell us, hey, this team has been a little bit underachieving the last 2 years, a lot of injuries. But, hey, if we can pull that one off, I think we could have that same 2017 feel. And of course, it's just exciting to see two of the best young quarterbacks in the league, Carson Wentz and Lamar Jackson, go head-to-head for the first time. But a fun fact that it's been brought up a couple times, the Eagles have 3 major players in this roster that they got with help from Baltimore. I remember 2017, they traded down, so Baltimore got Lamar Jackson, but the Eagles got Dallas Goedert, who's one of their starter tight ends, Avonte Maddox, who's going to be the starting outside corner opposite Slay, and of course Miles Sanders. So you don't see a lot of trades work out for both teams in the league anymore, but I'd say this one worked out pretty well.
Yeah, for sure. I think both sides got a great deal with that. Alrighty, guys. So I think this is going to be it for this podcast. I would like to once again thank Jay for joining us on the podcast today. He was amazing. I also like to thank Brooks and Kyrie for joining us yet again. They're excellent with this podcast. And do you guys have any final words?
Yeah, I just wanted to say, when the Ravens play the Eagles, Lamar Jackson, I want and he will have a big game just because Marty Mornhinweg is there. And I don't think people remember, earlier in the season, there was a report that Marty said he wanted Lamar to be removed the wide receiver. He denied it. I call total bullcrap on that. I believe he did want to be moved to receiver. So I let Lamar Jackson have like 400-something passing yards and like 100-something rushing yards, just so I can like sit back and just celebrate. So I just want to say that.
Yeah, and I just want to say this matchup comes once every 4 years. The last 2 times they've faced off, they've been great matchups that kind of came down to the wire. It was Carson Wentz's rookie year. They came to Baltimore, and it came down to a 2-point conversion try. I think Lamar, this is an opportunity for him to have a huge game. It's nice when we go cross-conference, and it'll be the first time teams have seen Lamar, especially the Eagles, who struggle with mobile quarterbacks. And if you look at the Eagles' schedule, week 1 through 5, they really play either non-weak offenses or teams that rely heavily on defense, like San Fran and Pittsburgh. Those are their better matchups. So this will be their first explosive offense, and we saw that against the Patriots last year, who were hyped up as the best defense until they faced the Ravens and Lamar torched them. So I think that's a big thing. And my biggest concern is Miles Sanders. I think he runs really smoothly and really well. He reminds me a little bit of Raheem Mostert, who had a huge game against us last year. I think containing him and making Carson Wentz make big plays and not just methodically move down the field is the key to the Ravens getting an easy victory here.
I'm excited to play the Eagles. I think you guys are going to do good this year. I think it's a 2-team division with you and Dallas. I don't see much out of Washington or New York. I think the Eagles got better. They got Javon Hargrave on that defensive line. I think that was a really underrated signing. I think pairing him with Fletcher Cox, that's going to wreak havoc. They traded for Darius Slay. They upgraded their receiving core. Plus, they'll have Miles Sanders back, even better. They'll have Carson Wentz back, hopefully healthy. So I think the Eagles are going to be one of the best teams in the NFC this year.
Baltimore should be just as good as they were last year, so it should be a good game.
Yeah. Maybe potential Super Bowl matchup. Who knows?
We will see.
Yeah, we'll see. All right, guys. So that's going to be it for this week's episode of the podcast. I would like to thank you to everyone for listening. Your support goes a long ways in helping to make sure this podcast continues to run. This podcast is available on Spotify and Apple Podcasts. It is no longer available on SoundCloud, but it is available on Google Podcasts, as well as Overcast, Castbox, any of those other podcast apps you may listen to. I'd like to give a big shout out today to Brooks Lebo and Kyrie Jones for helping me co-host this episode. They do a fantastic job each and every week. Both are excellent with this and know a lot about the Ravens. I'd also like to give a big shout out to Spencer Silverstein, our executive producer. We could not make this show work without him. He does all the behind-the-scenes stuff. He's the hardest worker here. Big shout out to him. I'd also like to give a big shout out to Jack Davis for making the intro for this podcast. He did a fantastic job. All of their Instagram bios are in the bio of @EverythingRavens podcast. So make sure to hit them up, give them a follow. That's all we have for this week. Thank you guys for tuning in. Go Ravens.
What a play! 40, 30, 20, 10, 1 minute!
Super Bowl out of me. Believe that. Believe that.
No copyright intended. All content rights go to their respective owners.